Hi everyone, and welcome to another Raw Attraction podcast. Today we're back with Teal Swan. She was on podcast number 1 back 4 or 5 years ago now, and I asked her, seeing as though we're now at podcast 100, I asked her, and she's kindly accepted to come back on the show, and I'm happy to have her. How are you doing today, Teal?
Good. I'm really good.
Great. And today our focus is going to be around loneliness, and that's because Teal is writing a book currently, or I don't know if you finished it yet, but it's out in
Oh, yeah.
October, right? So it's out
Mhm.
out in October, and it's something that's come up for a lot of people around me, and I think it comes up for everyone at some point in their lives. This concept of loneliness, whether it's an existential crisis or loneliness from not feeling connected to a community or to a person or to a parent. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion around that today. So I'll ask you, Teal, where would you like to sort of start with this? What's the overlaying theme for you when you think about loneliness? What does it conjure up in you?
Honestly, that this is a worldwide epidemic problem. And
Mm-hmm.
what's really interesting is that we're living in a world today where it seems like we're more connected to each other, based on the fact that we've got technology, we've got all these social media sites, and we can connect to somebody no matter where they are in the world now. But the
Mm-hmm.
question is, what kind of connection and how deep is that connection? And what I'm watching within the world is it's actually making us more lonely instead of less lonely.
Mm.
Loneliness is an epidemic issue, and it's not just solved by being in the room with someone. That's what's interesting, because it's easy to assume that, well, if we just put the effort into walking out our door and going somewhere where we will meet somebody, which is a good idea, but it's an assumption that that gets rid of our loneliness. But the epidemic issue that I'm seeing with loneliness is more of a psychological loneliness. It's something that is it's perseverant regardless of whether you're in the room with someone or not.
Mm. Is it
And
psychological or spiritual?
it's psychological. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the type of loneliness that I want to address first and foremost with people.
Yeah. Um, what what is the causation effects that we're seeing in society because of this? What's the impact on society because of it?
The impact is basically every kind of negative act that you see within this universe can trace its origins back to this loneliness or a sense of isolation. If a person is in connection with another person, it's impossible for them to hurt them without feeling the impact.
Mm-hmm.
So you trace back the root of every war is the sense of isolation or disconnection from another person.
Mm.
um, School shootings, terrorism, the fact that governments won't take care of the people who they stand on. I mean, all of it is the
Mm.
result of this disconnection. And disconnection, of course, is the root of this sensation of loneliness.
And what do you think the average person does to cope with loneliness? What is the normal coping mechanism in society for someone who's feeling lonely? Do you think, for example, maybe addictions or
Yes.
other things?
I think we are an addiction based culture. And so, it's really tempting for people to look at each other and think that addiction is just a small percentage of individuals, but it's freaking everyone. It's just that
Mm.
some people found ways to be addicted that are more socially acceptable, whereas some people have not. Like I did a whole show the other day where I was talking about the fact that your entire, the way that society runs its entire marketing campaigns around every product is
Mm-hmm.
around the concept of addiction. It's that you can make up for something that's missing or some pain that you're experiencing through this way of covering it up. It's basically Novocaine.
Mm.
Instead of solving the original issue, how do we make it so we don't feel it anymore? And that's, I mean, almost every product sold today is sold under that premise. Oh, you feel shitty self-esteem? Okay, well, let's cover that self-esteem problem over with what I'm going to tell you the antidote to feeling that way is. And it's this new brand of makeup. So we're an addicted culture. All of us are trying to escape the original wound.
Do we have to? I mean, obviously, you're going to come up with some steps in this moment when I ask you of some antidotes to this, but um, do we have to admit that we are all lonely to even get past the loneliness? Is that the
Yes.
first step? Like, where is the first step in this?
Yes, because one of the biggest issues that we have is that we grow up with this idea where we feel the angst, we feel the emptiness, but we don't know what's missing. That is, it's classic human behavior. Like a child knows that they don't like consciously know it, but they know in their body that what they need is this deep sense of connection with mom and dad, and then later on peers. And if they don't get that, it creates a starvation in the same way that physically you would be starving for food. But if you had no context for lots of food, if you've grown up where everyone's starving to death, you would never know consciously what the hell you were missing. And that is the state of the world today. So we have to have the awareness that this is the collective condition. We have to have the awareness of what it is that we're missing in order to figure out that we need to go after it and even dedicate ourselves, any portion of ourselves, to achieving that thing. So yeah, it's critical for us to understand that we're lonely and to admit it to ourselves. But I mean, it's hard for us because we are already taught so incredibly intensely that it's not okay to need someone else, even in the spiritual community. And I'm going to be real aggressive at this because I honestly, you will not shake hands with somebody that hates the spiritual field more than me. And it's what I've chosen. I like, but I hate the spiritual field because what it is it's a group of people who never got any of their emotional needs met by people, and so they had to turn to God. Now, that may have done some positive things, but it also did some wicked negative things. That is that we can use spirituality to bypass our own biology, and it's a huge bypass. We basically say, you know what? You don't need anyone else. You can have everything that you want from within, and it's absolute, complete bullshit. But this is something that we don't want to accept because it puts us in the position where if we need something and we can't get it from other people, now we're powerless. And wait, as spiritual teachers, we're supposed to be teaching how to be empowered. And so we should teach people how to be okay being alone instead of teach them how to be connected. So I actually see the spiritual field as fueling the issue.
Certainly a definitely interesting thing to talk about that isn't talked about much. For me, I mean, on my, let's say spiritual path, just to annoy you. So one of my spiritual teachers, in quotes, told me that we all came down to these dimensions to have an experience of separation.
Yes.
And so I think that's true for me anyway.
No, it is true.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we want, and that comes combined to what I was actually doing over this weekend, which was an intimacy workshop where we were doing body to body stuff. It wasn't sexual. It was just simply like literally breathing with one another human, whilst certain levels of touch up to hugging, like you could be touching knees on the floor. Like that was literally like the lowest end of the intimacy scale on a physical sense, to breathing with them. So, and the amount of love that was like rose up in that room and oxytocin going through your body, it felt like we were on drugs half like the 3 days. So yeah, I mean, that's certainly one way to resolve, I think, some of the things you're talking about. But what are the other things that you write in your book? I know you've got different pillars you talk about. If you want to go into that.
Yeah, the three primary pillars of loneliness, which is basically the anatomy of what creates that psychological loneliness that isn't automatically resolved by being next to someone in terms of vicinity. The first is separation in and of itself. It's the concept of a singular I. Now, this is something that in spiritual practice we've been talking about for thousands of years. I just went really in depth with it. It's the fact that when you create a self-concept, it differentiates you and defines you. And so separation is the primary, and it's a mentality, it's the primary thing which causes the separation between us and other people. So recognizing that and seeing beyond that, seeing that it is actually the idea of being separate that creates the separation is the first pillar to topple. The second is shame. Shame is an interesting condition because it is to push oneself away. So I want you to imagine that as a young child, you come in with all kinds of traits. So all polarities you have present within you. You have anger, for example, and you have joy. If you feel anger, and that's a part of you, right? And the people in your environment make an enemy of your anger, then you will try to push that part of yourself away from yourself. But obviously, because you are one consciousness, you can't push you away. The only way to do that is to create a split, which is separation internally, within your own consciousness. So you become fragmented. So the state of fragmentation, which is a state of separation as a result of pushing yourself away, creates an internal fragmentation that makes it so that you avoid relationships. And it makes it so, if you're pushing yourself away, the external reality starts to mirror you being pushed away by other people. So then
I think
I'm
everyone
suggesting.
listening needs to listen to that again because there's important points you're saying. For sure. I'll have to make a clip of that bit and put it out there for everyone. So, but where does the shame come in? At which point does the shaming? Is
That
it
is that is shame. So that
you're
you mean like
saying?
what
So
point?
that's your definition of shame.
Well, that actually is what shame is when you look at it at an energetic level.
Mm.
Shame is to push yourself away.
Okay. Yeah.
You just can't.
It's
You
going
can't.
into my brain like I've never heard this before, and then I'm like analyzing, going, "Yes, that's actually true."
Yes. And what's really interesting about shame that most people don't know, because we think it's an emotion, the emotion that we associate with shame is actually a secondary reaction to the primary mechanism of shame. And it's a little bit more like what happens with a sea anemone when you poke it. What makes shame so incredibly difficult to remedy is the fact that it's not an evolved conscious process. It's something that takes place actually in the reptilian portion of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking with a instinct. Shame is an instinct. Kind of like if you take a sea anemone and you poke it with a stick, the sea anemone is going to react to it instantaneously. Or the same as if I come in and I try to punch you, you're going to flinch. That is how um, primitive the reaction of shame is, and shame being to push yourself away. It is. It's a mechanism that exists to try to endear you to the social group, but in and of itself creates loneliness.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So it just creates loneliness by the sheer fact of the process.
Yes.
Um.
So, and then of course, how that secondary feeling of shame causes you to interact with other people. If you feel shame for yourself, you're going to withdraw, and you're going to change your outside appearance so that other people accept a false facade, both of which enhance your isolation.
Because this is such a kind of probably a new learning for most people listening, maybe all. Um, how would you describe this, or how would you teach this to a child? Like, I know you have a child, so you're probably trying to instill some of these things into him, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that as they
Well, the
go
problem
through
is
life?
I don't teach them about shame.
Mm-hmm.
I try to create a condition in which he will not feel shame. So, for example, anything that comes up that is a part of him, any emotion, XYZ, I am aware that even the way I look at him dictates how he will respond to himself. So, my attitude towards my child is I want to constantly pull him, even if what I'm teaching him is that, he should change the way he behaves in some way. It's like the way that I go about addressing that is a pull instead of a push away. So if he gets really angry, I'll say, "Oh, I see you're really angry right now. You want to talk to mommy about what you're angry about?" And that's to allow the anger to be a part of himself, so there's not a fragmentation created. Now, in
Mm.
today's world, raising a child where no fragmentation takes place, I would love to say it's possible, but I just
Mm.
don't see that it's possible.
No.
If you catch it.
Well,
So
yeah.
it's about decreasing the level of fragmentation that a child experiences and goes through. I'm also spending a lot of my time selecting schools for him and environments for him where I know that fragmentation is less likely to take place. Schools, for example, that aren't going to focus incessantly on what he is not good at and instead going to streamline him towards what his talents are, for example. So
Yeah, you focus basically on the emotions, and then is it
yeah,
is it all a focus on the emotions, whether you're a
no,
child or an adult? Where do you need to focus?
I think focusing on emotions is the most important part, regardless of whether you're a child or an adult, because it's the foundation of who we are.
Mm.
And we don't realize it, but we're actually the most closely identified with our emotions because it defines our personal truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that's one of the most important layers. But thoughts are another important layer. Actions are another important layer. But the thought that I'm having when I'm dealing with people at all moments of the day, when I'm, conscious about it, is they're going to make an enemy of some aspect of them if I make an enemy of it. And I don't want to create that fragmentation within them. So instead, I'm going to not make an enemy of any part of them. So and it makes it, me highly successful in my career too, because if somebody comes to me and what's currently part of them is the fact that, they're a pedophile, I can't get anywhere with that if I see it as, if I'm judging it as this is completely wrong and they're screwed up for it, and I'm going to look at them with that, complete rejection, it causes them actually to push that part of themselves away, which actually makes it 10 times more dangerous, because anything you suppress gets bigger. And it starts to take on, because it's rejected, by virtue of being rejected, it takes on its negative expression. What happens when you take a part of yourself as part of yourself, regardless of how dark or demonic we may think that thing is, when you take it as part of yourself, that's what love is, to take something as part of yourself. By virtue of just doing that, you can't injure it without injuring yourself too, and vice versa. And so you start to see this transformation take place, which I call exaltation, where that trait starts to take on more positive qualities instead of negative qualities. My best way to explain this is, let's say you've got an energy vampire that you're dealing with. This person really sucks energy from other people. Now it's tempting to be like, God, I can't stand that person. Like, screw them for this, and to push them away. And now they make an enemy of it. And they're like, I don't know what to do about it because I'm just craving people's energy all day long. And now I have to get it in all these manipulative ways because it's not right to get it directly. When you really take that in as part of yourself and freaking own it, what we see is not that somebody becomes this evil vampiristic type of person. Instead, it takes on a more positive expression. So this person might be the most brilliant energy worker. The energies they're taking off of somebody and that people are going to them willingly to have taken are the negative energies, for example, that they need to have withdrawn from their body. So I'm very interested right now, especially relative to this idea of loneliness, at reversing this process of self-rejection, which creates a state of internal fragmentation, which I go in, in the book that I wrote, I go really in depth with this concept. So,
and then I guess if you're lonely, you don't want to reject that loneliness. That's you kind of
exactly
right at the end of the scale. So
yeah, yes.
And then that non-rejection of the loneliness throws you back into like complete self contemplation. And
yeah, see, you get it. This is exactly what I'm trying to say. Like, you can't, and this is what we don't do because we're too shy about it. We don't want to admit that we need people, and so we'll never recognize the part of ourselves that is lonely, so we can never take it as part of ourselves, so we can never remedy any aspect of it. We can never actually make it less lonely by giving it our presence. So it's almost like the external loneliness we're experiencing is a perfect mirror of the internal loneliness, the condition we create through fragmentation and rejection of aspects of ourselves.
The title of the book isn't Don't Reject Your Loneliness, is it?
No.
Oh.
It's the anatomy of loneliness.
Okay. Maybe the subtitle. Oh, you can't change it now. But yeah, now I get it. Because, yeah, that you're like coming at both sides of the spectrum, so you can't escape the teachings that you're offering. Like, you're covering everything. So, so
the third pillar, or you ready to move on from?
Yeah, carry on.
The third pillar of loneliness is fear. And when we fear something, we push that thing away from ourselves, which is more separation. So separation is the overall theme of isolation. Me versus you. Distance between me and you. So if I fear you, instantly what I'm going to do energetically is I'm going to push you away from myself. And by doing that, I can't do that without isolating myself. So it's about reversing that process of fear. And the first thing that we got to do is, we can't push through fear. This is something that most people in the spiritual and self-help industry teach you to do. You got to push through it. That's like doing things despite it. That's horrible. Because it's no different doing that than it is taking a small child. Internally, by the way, this is the version of it, is taking a small child who's terrified and being like, well, you're getting in the water anyway. Bam, right? So we actually enhance the level of self-distrust and thus pushing ourselves away again. See, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. So we can't push through fear. We also have got to, try to bring things closer to ourselves. That's got to be our constant thought. So it's about moving forward into connection with our fear, almost like we're carrying it like a child.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of my own example recently, and probably an example for many people listening. The receiving end of fear, or the receiving end of someone pushing you away, that creates another kind of situation. Yes. What do you?
Yes, it does.
Especially if this happened to me. For example, it happened to me recently. I kind of annoyed my friend a little bit. Accidentally, I went around his house and I left after 5 minutes because I wanted to watch the World Cup in English rather than Czech because I live in Prague. He got annoyed and he sort of said, right, if you don't apologize, I'm not going to speak to you. And I was like, what the fuck? It was only a small thing that I fucked up on here, if at all. And I knew he was rejecting part of himself, but our friendship, all these things. Yet I felt like, does he need to learn this lesson? Do I give him space to learn this lesson, even though it hurts me not to be able to connect with him over the next few days? But speaking now, it's fine. But yeah, it kind of was a weird situation. So what do you advise for people on the receiving end of, say, someone pushing you away?
You ready?
Yeah, go.
You find the part internally that is being mirrored by them externally. In this universe, it's an absolute reality of this universe that we are a fractal within the greater fractal of the universe. Now, what we know about the basis of fractals is self-similarity. So if you're experiencing something in the external world, you have an internal corresponding part. So you essentially would have a part that rejects yourself for something like that. So what we would do is parts work. We work with these fragmented aspects of self. You don't even need to consciously know what they are to do this. You just essentially choose, okay, I'm putting myself in the role of the part of me that is exactly the same as, and then fill in the blank with that guy's name. Mm-hmm. And then you let the energy take over your body, almost like you're channeling. Like you don't want to think about you being you, and don't really think a lot. Just let the energy talk for you. Or if you're doing it by yourself, I like to have people do left-hand writing exercises or non-dominant handwriting exercises, where you're basically asking this aspect questions and it's just answering. And when you start to work with the consciousness of that part internally, and it brings you closer, actually, not only with that part that was fragmented within yourself, but also with the person in the external. Understanding the fear, also, it's really important for us to understand the fear and relate to the fear. Because that's another thing that doing this exercise, what it does is it helps us to relate to why they're reacting the way that they're reacting. Mm-hmm. And that actually makes us feel closer than farther apart. I've been using this with my haters, by the way. For years, I was tormented by them. I still don't enjoy it. I mean, it really sucks when people want to kill you. But when I started to play the aspects of, internally that were mirrored by them so that I understood their psychology completely, I started to feel really close to them, actually. And it's drastically changed the way that I relate to them. It's not like keeping me up at night anymore like it used to.
Yeah. Because even you see the best people in the world, they all have their haters. Like the ones I look up to in the world, like people like yourself or business leaders or whatever, like people who are leading in a conscious, healthy way, yet they still have haters. I'm like, oh, these guys still have to, we still have to find these aspects of ourselves and take responsibility for everything that's kind of happening in our worlds, is what you're saying, I think. And you've got an aspecting, like, do you call it an aspecting process, or you call it something else when you go through it?
The best way that type of a process is called parts work. There's tons of different methodologies for parts work, and I love it. I think that, when it comes, integration is the most important thing for human beings to create in the world today, within themselves and with each other. So, one of the, parts work is one of the best processes to go through, and there are several different methodologies that teach parts work. Gestalt taught parts work. Voice dialogue teaches parts work. I'm sure there's like tons of different methods, but it's amazing work. Amazing work. And I am completely convinced that this is where the human race needs to be headed.
Yeah. It's just about getting this how do we get this education out there even more and more and more? I think technology is actually going to help us do that, as well as all the social media. There is a grand wave that started probably in the last 10 years.
Yes. But we need to start seeing that we're fragmented.
Yeah.
We don't get it because we call ourselves by one name. I call myself Teal, so I don't recognize my fragmentation. I just consider it as an interesting aspect of me that when I'm doing sports, I'm in a completely different personality than when I'm talking to you on this Skype call. I don't call that fragmentation, and yet it is. And some of those fragments can get us into real trouble.
I agree. Yeah, I've certainly been through that process myself on a shamanic level, which I won't talk about now because it'll take 6 hours. But I was very much dealing with aspects of myself in different dimensions, playing stupid games, which was fun. But there's all these aspects of ourselves that are fragmented as we travel the world or meet new people or feel new emotions in our body. Like these are all signals of what is the fragmented parts of us, unless you're 100% joyous all the time or something, like living in complete state of union and bliss, like perhaps Jesus and Buddha did, maybe. Probably not, but yeah, Teal's got a very important point, that education of knowing that we're fragmented, and especially in Sinazo, most of my podcasts are about intimate relationships. That is reflected so much in the intimate relationships, right?
Well, that is the attraction that we have towards people.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm sort of going around the world now ruining relationships for people, even though relationships are the most important thing and I love them. But the reality is that I'm ruining relationships for people, because the reason you have the strong attraction that you have to a person is because of polarity. That polarity exists because you fragmented off from that aspect within yourself. So the universe is basically giving you the opportunity to love what you suppressed, denied, rejected, or disowned in somebody external to you. And that's why in the beginning it feels amazing, because you get closer to that unity and that oneness with that aspect you've split off from internally. But in the same vein, you split off from it for a reason. And that's because externally you were shamed for it. There's an aspect of you that judged it. There's a reason you rejected it, denied it, and disowned it. And so quite quickly, after the limerence phase of relationship wears off, you turn against it in the same way you turned against your original part. And that's when the real work of relationships begins. It's about, can I bring this aspect closer to myself? And what's even more powerful than that, how do I find that aspect internally and create harmony and cohesion and integration with that aspect internally, so that this external relationship will mirror and reflect that, instead of being now the thing that upsets me the most in my life.
Mm-hmm. So when you are in a relationship, you have to remember that you are lonely and you are fragmented, and all of these coping mechanisms and traumatic emotional expressions that often come out in relationships. For example, you can get mad. I watched my parents like argue all the time about literally nothing half the time. And this is coping with their loneliness. They've separated from themselves. They're looking to find love in the other. They can't find it. It's not there. They're mad about it. How do we... Is it a matter of just taking more time for ourselves in relationships to make sure we do this work? What is the...
Yeah, it's critical for us to do this work, but it's also like the second half of my whole book is on how to create lasting connection. And it's about the fact that we got to stop drawing a line between self and other. We've got to stop. It doesn't matter whether we're loving ourselves or loving someone else. It's all self-love. Otherwise, we can't say that we believe in oneness. There is only self-love, and there is no such thing as self-love, you see.
Oh, fuck. That made tingles down my back. Oh, you just gave me some sort of energetic orgasm, but I can have brain orgasms just by someone licking my head. Just podcast 59 if you want to go back to my brain orgasm podcast. But yeah, you definitely did something there. I never thought of that. Self-love, like loving someone else is self-love. Well, there's no separation in between the two. Shit. I think my mind just got blown.
Well, this is why I feel like focusing, regardless of whether you're focusing on the internal parts or our external parts, which is what other people are, we have to learn how to take other people or other as part of ourselves. This is the basic learning process which we as humans have come here to educate ourselves in. And we're seeing a resurgence of Christ consciousness. Christ was all about love. To love is to take something as part of thyself. What we saw in his life is he took the lepers as part of himself, when all of society was saying, this is not me. And it is the most difficult process of all. It is the master process. It is the only path of spirituality, if you want me to tell you the truth. And so there's ways that we can go about doing this. And like you said, you just came from an intimacy workshop. That is the foundation of this work. It's my capacity to see you, feel you, hear you, understand you. And I can guarantee you, if I do that, I cannot cause you pain.
I can't put you in detention cells on the border of Mexico.
Yeah, exactly. I can't because it causes me pain. If I'm in connection with you, being in connection is the only safety that we will ever have as humans. There is no other safety. All other safety is illusion. The only safety we have is if I take you as part of myself, I cannot hurt you without hurting myself. I can't do it. Now, if we all functioned like this as a world, I can tell you that it wouldn't look like it does today.
Yeah, I know. I'm literally meditating on that and sort of inviting silence in everyone listening just to meditate on that. Like, really. It's powerful, powerful words and truth. So breathe in that silence for a moment. So we may see these things on a global scale now, like people are listening, they're looking at some of the things that's happening in the world at the moment, and they're thinking maybe this task is beyond us. Like, what do you say? Is it beyond us as a species?
If I believed that it was beyond us as a species, I would not be in the line of work I am today. I have to believe that it's possible. Otherwise, I give up on myself, and I'm not willing to do that. At the same time, I am just as discouraged. But there comes a point with discouragement where you hit a crossroads. What am I going to do about this? Yes, I may very well fail at this mission. I may be shot on stage. I may never teach people how to be in connection. We may have a third world war and wipe out half the human race, if not more. And so then what? Do I sit on a beach with daiquiris? Does that really make me happy? If the answer is yes, I would be doing that. But the crossroads moment is, there is no other life to live than to try for it. It doesn't matter if you're going to make it or not. I mean, the best missions on Earth are the ones where you would die doing it.
Yeah, I feel the same.
So it's like the Wright brothers in flight, you know? They were like, well, if we crash and we die trying to create a way for human beings to be in the air, then so be it. And I have that same attitude towards this. There is no other way to live than to love. So I'm going to do it, and I'm going to teach people to do it. And if I die doing it, then I will consider it a life well lived.
Yeah, I feel the same about my work. Like, you know, this whole intimacy game, the spiritual path, in quotes, is basically what you're saying, is coming back to the self-love and realizing there's nothing outside of ourselves, and if we want this world to be a paradise without all the violence and everything else that's going on, then we need to see it as that and grab our brothers and sisters by the shoulder and say, come with me, we need your help. Like, this is one thing we need right now, is everyone helping. Pick up your bags and come with us. Yeah.
Well, something I like to tell people too when they feel really super overwhelmed is to think about, you know, the collective is like a big pie. And you have to recognize that you are a piece of the pie. So if the only thing you ever take responsibility for is your own tiny piece of the pie, what it takes for you to feel just that much more joyous, that much less suffering, that much more connected, that is that piece of the pie of the totality. So it's not like you have to go change the entire world.
Yeah, and I think I've heard, I don't know who it was, but many people talk about it from the scientific perspective of being an atom or a molecule in a network of others, and your activities, you're part of an organism, so anything you do, because you're I think they talk about cells and organisms rather than atoms. So my science is not, I failed at science, so excuse me. Cells in an organism, so one cell in that organism can affect everything. So the more cells we have flipping and switching their spiritual self-love lights on, then shit changes really fast. And then I think there's either in maths or science. Again, I was better at maths, but there's a tipping point at some point. I think Malcolm Gladwell, I think it was him, but it might have not been. Someone wrote the tipping point, and there's a certain number of people when it gets to that. It doesn't have to. I think it's like around 10%, something like that. 10 or 12%, and then suddenly everything will change. So
Yes. Well, it's the 100th monkey complex.
yeah. So yeah, once it's just a ripple effect as well.
Which is what I'm seeing. And what we're seeing in the world today is a real interesting paradox, because the tension and the polarity is getting stronger. So you're seeing more and more people wake up. So it's like the tension on the scale is going this way, and more people resisting it. So it's important for us to understand that some of the tension we're experiencing is that polarizing happening within human consciousness itself, where I do see more and more people waking up on a daily basis. So it's quite inspiring, you know.
What briefly, I think we've got a few minutes left, around 10 or something max. What are the symptoms that you see of people waking up? Maybe someone's listening who's going through this. What is that process?
Well, the first stage, unfortunately, is general disillusion with the world itself. Most people who wake up are really waking up to how messed up this planet is. They're starting to question the things that they never questioned before. That's where it usually starts. Wait, why am I in this job? Why am I going through the motions? It's like, why? And then you're starting to look at other people and notice how it's almost like they're just hamsters on a hamster wheel. Now, that disillusionment state is pretty painful. Usually you don't have the answer to the antidote yet. You just have, oh my gosh, I've woken up to how crappy it is. So it's a little dip and a depression, and like suddenly you can't you be participating in the same friendship groups that you used to be participating in. And so you lose those people too. It's like this horrible in-between phase. And then you develop sensitivities to things that you normally took for granted. Foods are really classic. So as human consciousness is increasing, we can't be a match of the same foods and not have big issues with it. So our bodies are having issues with sugars, processed foods, meats, things that human beings shouldn't be eating in general. I'm seeing a lot of sensitivities crop up within people who are starting to wake up. Some people are having real disturbances around sleep in their wake-up process, because their personal frequency is no longer a match to solely to the physical dimension. They're starting to see synchronicities everywhere. Numbers are starting to...
That's a big one. I remember when I was sort of going through that process, and synchronicities were a big thing.
So you feel like you're in the Matrix. To begin with, you're like, what is going on here? There might just be something bigger here than meets the eye. Yeah.
And then what is the process, the next steps do you recommend for people who realizing they're waking up? What is it a matter about finding their mission, that they need to help other people to help them live a more conscious life? Like,
not yet. No, I don't feel like people are really in the space yet for that. I feel like it's about people following their own personal joy. I feel like when people first wake up out of the human collective dream state, so to speak, they have to start to follow their emotions. So if it's, I don't feel good in this job, it's, I'm going to go in the direction of what does feel good. I'm going to start taking the risks that society has programmed me that I shouldn't take. And when they start to do that, this natural process takes place where they step into a place where the gift that they're meant to bring to this world naturally expresses itself, because they can be no other than in alignment with your joy. It's not possible for someone's purpose in the form of what gift you're meant to give will be separate from your joy. So it's almost like joy is like following the North Star. When you don't know the answer and you don't know what direction you're really headed towards, you don't know the destination, so to speak, you're following the North Star of your emotions, and it inevitably leads you to that place.
Yeah, your heart-filled, truthful joy. That's a really good place to start.
Yeah, but most people don't know joy, though. Most people know relief. So what's really important for people that are beginning the path is to chase relief. What just feels like that much more relief, and that's not escapism. Like, it'll feel, when you're going in the direction of what feels like that form of relief, it'll feel like self-truth. It feels scary, it feels risky, but it feels like relief.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And practical points for people to follow if they're even being triggered by this conversation, which I imagine most people would be, because it's a deep discussion that really can start to awaken things in you. Were you going to say something then? No? Okay. So, yeah, And then part of that process of waking up as well, I imagine you realize your loneliness, and well, you've realized you're lonely now because you've just listened to this podcast, and now you've got to go on the self-love journey. So it's like coming back, and then just maybe a final few minutes we can focus on this. People who are feeling lonely and perhaps in more of a they've gone through maybe a spiritual process. They've woken up a little bit more, and they're feeling still this existential crisis, like, and they don't feel like they belong here. I have not a lot, but a few friends that feel like that at the moment. They're like, why am I here? Like, I just want to die. But they still joyous in their being on a day-to-day basis when I interact with them. But yeah, they have this kind of existential, why am I here? I don't know what's going on thing. Any tips?
Yeah, it's not possible for people to feel that way if they actually see their place within the world. So these are people who have not followed all the way through to their purpose yet.
Just they need more patience.
It's not really about more. Well, I mean, that aspect could be one aspect to it, but what I feel like is super important if you're in that phase is to start surrounding yourself with people who actually you feel the need for you. Mm-hmm. So what tends to happen with us is that we start to wake up, and I'm going to be honest with you, the single family household was never supposed to be the way that human beings lived. Mm. When the concept of property ownership started to come up, we started to separate and separate and separate and separate. We got more and more what's me, mine, and I. And so we now are living in a society where the basic structure of that society is complete and utter isolation and loneliness. And it's not possible to wake up as a person and to look at what we've created here and to choose that because it's not in alignment with health in any way. So what I'm watching in people who are like what you're saying, they're waking up at that point. They're like, okay, I see that I'm lonely. I see that this is screwed up. But now what do I do about it? And the answer is you can do no other than to take action steps. Mm. The majority of people who are going to be waking up are going to be gearing society back towards a tribal-based type of a dynamic, but without the shadows inherent within tribe, without the consequences inherent within tribe and all of that. So graduating towards actually taking the initiative to not just, to really live in community and to create those communities is the progression of the human race. And a lot of the people who are feeling like you were saying, that these people are feeling, they haven't taken that step yet. It's like, okay, well, I'm still living in my one-bedroom apartment, or I'm still isolated in the suburbs, or I'm still, XYZ. It's not that they've chosen to create a joint venture with other people to say this is our life. And when you step into that place is when things will really change for you. I can personally attest to it, having taken that step myself. You will start to feel as if you belong when you're needed by the people around you. Stepping into community was one of the best things I ever did. And I was super lonely. Obviously I wouldn't be writing a book like this if I didn't suffer from the same condition for years. And stepping into a community, I was able to actually see the value and the necessity for me. I see that everything I do affects the people that I live with on a daily basis. I see that this is a joint venture. It's actually quite powerful. It's terrifying, but it's quite powerful to know how dependent these people are on you. To know that, if I drop the ball tomorrow, my son suffers. 20 other people suffer. And badly, and in lots of physical ways, not just emotional ways. And it adds pressure, but it's a divine pressure. That's what I wish that I could share with people. It is absolutely divine pressure to see how much you're needed. It's a divine pressure that those of us who tried to commit suicide didn't have the moment that we put the gun to our forehead.
Yeah, and I've been there myself after massive spiritual crisis. I nearly jumped off a freaking thing in Barcelona. So anyone in that situation, I just fucking recommend to reach out for as much help as you possibly can, because you are needed and you are part of this human organism. We need you here to continue and prosper. You never know.
Well, that's what you don't feel. In that moment, they feel, you know what it's like. In that moment, you feel like nobody needs you for fucking anything. You feel like they would do better off without you.
Yeah. Well, do your best to help. Reach out for help if you're in that moment.
I have a video too, by the way, for anybody who's suicidal watching this. Mm-hmm. I have a video specifically given to people in the state.
Search that on YouTube. So we'll have to wrap up because our technology was screwing with us earlier, but I'm pleased that I got more than 22 minutes because my last time we spoke, I was in a hammock in Guatemala, and the internet was so bad it cut off. So it's been great to dive deeper with you today, and hopefully get to speak to you again in the future at some point. Thanks so much for your time, and for your book, your site. People can pre-order it, right? And
Yes.
at tealswan.com, you should find links straight on the homepage, I think. And then it's out when? October. If you're listening to this after October, it's going to be out anyway. And you can get it, so I highly recommend that. I think I've read, but you've had, it's your third. Is it your third book or fourth? I think I've read 2 of them. I must have missed one, but I highly recommend all Teal's books, so please support her work. It's important that we support these creative, spiritual, or in quotes spiritual, if you don't want to be called spiritual anymore, but these people doing great work. We need to support them on their education. It's important to do that so that we can spread this word further and further and further, and not only that, you're going to get tons of value from reading a book, so please read it. Thanks again, Teal.
Thank you.